The bridge of the Vorg Thale, flagship of the Thale Dominion, buzzed with the orchestrated chaos of war. Streams of data poured across translucent display panels as officers barked orders in their guttural tongue. At the center of the chamber, towering over his subordinates, General Zarnkal watched the unfolding battle with a mix of anticipation and disdain. His fleet, one of the Dominion's most powerful, had finally arrived at Sol 3, a backwater planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. To Zarnkal, Earth was little more than a speed bump on the Dominion's march through the galaxy, a feeble obstacle to be swept aside. After all, no species from such a primitive world could withstand the might of the Thale. Yet something gnawed at him. Reports from the surface were odd. The humans, as they called themselves, were disorganized yet unervingly effective. They lacked advanced technology, but their strategies were bafflingly unpredictable. And their soldiers, small, fragile beings compared to the hulking Thale warriors, were holding key positions far longer than anticipated. Status update, Zarnkal growled, his voice a deep rumble that silenced the room. An officer turned, his pale, scaled skin glistening under the ship's crimson lights. General, we have encountered heavy resistance at all major cities. The human forces are employing irregular tactics that hinder our advances. They use their terrain with surgical precision, and their defensive formations are unconventional. Unconventional? Zarnkal narrowed his glowing amber eyes. Elaborate. The officer hesitated. They use small mobile units to ambush our supply lines. They strike from the shadows and retreat before we can counterattack. They are untrained cowards, Zarnkal interrupted, his claws clenching the armrests of his command throne. Primitive beings scurrying like insects. This is no strategy, merely desperation. Before the officer could respond, another voice cut through the air. General? A technician hunched over a glowing console, looked up with wide, frightened eyes. We've detected an infiltration on the Vorg Thale. Human soldiers have boarded the ship. The bridge fell silent. Zarnkal rose to his full height, his ridged head nearly brushing the ceiling. Impossible. How could they breach our defenses? They used debris, General. A disabled ship's wreckage masked their approach. We mistook it for battlefield detritus until it was too late. Zarnkal's claws scraped against the metal floor as he stepped forward. Find them. Eradicate them. But even as he spoke, a dull thud reverberated through the ship, followed by another. The sound grew louder, closer, until it was unmistakable: gunfire. Hashtag on the lower decks. Corporal Jenna Carter pressed her back against the cold, curved wall of the Thale warship, her pulse racing. The air was thick with the acrid stench of alien machinery, and the floor hummed with the ship's life force. She glanced at her squad, 4 soldiers clad in matte black armor, their faces hidden behind visors. Each of them carried a rifle far smaller than the Thale's energy cannons but infinitely more adaptable. Move fast, hit hard, and don't stop until we reach the core, Jenna whispered, her voice steady despite the odds. Copy that, muttered Private Alvarez, his grip tight on his weapon. They had trained for this. Months of preparation for an impossible mission. When Earth's leaders realized the Thale fleet was coming, they had sent a desperate plea to their military forces. Humanity had no orbital defenses, no advanced weaponry, and no hope of repelling the invasion in a conventional fight. But what they did have was ingenuity, and soldiers willing to risk everything. Jenna's team was part of Project Spectre, a last-ditch effort to strike the Thale where they least expected it. While Earth's main forces distracted the invaders on the surface, Spectre teams infiltrated their ships, sabotaging them from within. It was suicide work, but Jenna and her squad had volunteered without hesitation. The corridor ahead lit up with an eerie red glow as a squad of Thale warriors rounded the corner. They were massive, standing nearly 8 feet tall, their thick carapaces gleaming like polished stone. They carried heavy plasma rifles that could disintegrate a human in one shot. Contact! Jenna shouted, raising her weapon. The Thale opened fire, their plasma bolts scorching the walls. Jenna dove behind a console, returning fire with calculated precision. Her squad followed suit, their bullets punching through the gaps in the Thale's armor. Alvarez tossed a grenade, its explosion rocking the corridor. The Thale faltered, their lumbering movements no match for the human's speed and coordination. Keep moving, Jenna yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. The squad pressed forward, weaving through the alien architecture. Every step was a calculated risk. Every corner could conceal another ambush. But they pushed on, driven by a shared determination, to prove that humanity was more than the Thale had bargained for. Meanwhile, on the bridge. General, the human infiltrators are advancing rapidly. The officer's voice was laced with panic. They've disabled 3 power conduits and are heading for the main reactor. Zarnkal's jaws tightened. He had underestimated these creatures. They were not insects, they were predators, cunning and relentless. Dispatch the Praetorian Guard, he ordered. Seal off the reactor. I want these humans eliminated, no matter the cost. The Praetorian Guard, the Thal's elite warriors, were unmatched in combat. Clad in impenetrable armor and armed with devastating weapons, they were a force designed to crush any opposition. Yet, as Zarnkal watched the battle unfold on the ship's monitors, he couldn't shake a growing unease. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had encountered. They adapted to every countermeasure, exploiting weaknesses with terrifying efficiency. How? He muttered under his breath. How do they fight like this? No answer came, but deep down Zarnkal knew the truth. He was witnessing something extraordinary. The turning point. Jenna's squad reached the reactor chamber, its massive core glowing with an otherworldly light. The room was heavily guarded, but the humans had no choice. They had to disable the reactor to cripple the Vorgthal. Alvarez on my 6. Kira, take the high ground. Daniels, cover our flank, Jenna commanded, her voice sharp and unwavering. The team moved as one, their actions seamless. They had trained for this moment and despite the overwhelming odds, they fought with a ferocity that surprised even themselves. The Praetorian Guard entered the chamber, their presence a physical weight. Jenna fired a burst of rounds, but the bullets barely scratched their armor. New plan, she muttered. Aim for the joints. Slow them down. Her squad obeyed, their precise shots finding the gaps in the Thal's defenses. The Praetorians were powerful, but they were not invincible. As the battle raged, Jenna reached the reactor controls. Her fingers flew across the alien interface, guided by the intel her team had gathered before the mission. Jenna, we've got more incoming. Alvarez shouted, his voice strained. Just hold them off a little longer, she replied, her focus unbroken. The reactor's glow began to flicker, its hum growing unstable. Jenna knew they were running out of time. With a final keystroke, she activated the overload sequence. Core destabilized. Time to go. The squad retreated, their path marked by fire and chaos. Behind them, the reactor's energy surged, a ticking time bomb that would soon rip the Vorgthal apart. On the bridge, Zarnkal stared at the monitors in disbelief. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had breached his defenses, outmaneuvered his elite guards, and now his ship, his pride, was on the brink of destruction. These humans, he growled, his voice tinged with something he had never felt before, respect. They are not like any species we have faced. They are. He paused, searching for the right word. Unbelievable. As the Vorgthal trembled under the strain of its failing reactor, Zarnkal knew one thing for certain. The Thal Dominion had underestimated humanity. And it was a mistake they would not soon forget. The Vorgthal shuddered violently, its massive hull groaning as the overloaded reactor began destabilizing. Emergency sirens blared across the ship, their shrill tones echoing through the corridors. In the chaos, Jenna Carter and her squad sprinted through the twisting alien passageways, every step a race against time. Alvarez, status report. Jenna barked over the comms, her breath ragged but her focus razor-sharp. Alvarez checked the device strapped to his wrist, a compact translator and mapping tool reverse-engineered from salvaged Thal tech. We've got 3 possible exits, but all of them lead straight into hostile zones. Praetorian reinforcements are closing in from the east, and we've got another squad cutting us off to the west. Fantastic, muttered Daniels, his rifle slung low as he reloaded on the move. Nothing like being stuck in a death trap with aliens that could squash us like bugs. Quit whining, Kira snapped, her tone sharp but her hand steady as she lobbed a sensor disruptor behind them. The small device fizzled, releasing a localized EMP pulse that scrambled Thal tracking systems. We signed up for this. And I'm starting to regret it, Daniels quipped, but his pace didn't falter. Jenna glanced back at her squad. Exhaustion weighed on their faces, but their resolve remained intact. These were soldiers who knew the odds, who had accepted the grim reality of their mission from the beginning. Spectre teams weren't expected to return. They were expected to hurt the enemy, cripple them so Earth could have a fighting chance. Listen up, Jenna said, her voice cutting through their shared tension. This is where we make it count. No matter what's out there, we keep moving. Stick to cover, watch each other's 6, and don't waste a single shot. We get out of here or we go down swinging. Clear? Crystal, Alvarez said, his grin wry despite the situation. Let's make these bastards earn their payback. ###### the trap. The squad reached a junction, its walls lined with alien conduits pulsing with a faint blue light. The air here was thicker, tinged with the metallic tang of Thale atmosphere processing. Jenna raised a fist, signaling the team to halt. She crouched low, her visor scanning the corridor ahead. Movement, she whispered. Ahead, shadows shifted in the dim light. Thale soldiers, their towering forms unmistakable, moved with purpose, their heavy footfalls echoing like distant thunder. Jenna counted 6, no 7, and they were closing fast. Ambush, Kira murmured, taking position behind a support column. Jenna's mind raced. They couldn't afford a prolonged firefight. Every second wasted brought them closer to the ship's destruction. But retreat wasn't an option either, not with Praetorian forces bearing down on them from behind. Diversion, she said, formulating a plan on the fly. Daniels, Alvarez, you're with me. We draw their fire. Kira, you flank them. Hit hard and fast, then fall back to the secondary corridor. Got it, Kira replied, already moving to position herself. The plan was risky, but risk was all they had left. Jenna motioned to Alvarez and Daniels, and the three of them stepped into the open, weapons at the ready. Hey, lizard freaks! Alvarez shouted, firing a burst of rounds into the air. Come and get us. The Thale soldiers reacted immediately, their plasma rifles lighting up the corridor with searing bolts of energy. Jenna and her team returned fire, their bullets pinging off the alien armor but finding vulnerable joints and exposed circuits. Kira struck from the side, her precision shots cutting through the Thale formation like a scalpel. Grenades followed, their explosions disorienting the enemy and giving the humans a critical opening. Go, go, go! Jenna shouted, leading the charge as the squad slipped past the confused and battered Thale soldiers. ###### A Predator's Perspective. High above, General Zarnkal watched the scene unfold on a flickering holodisplay. His sharp, clawed hands gripped the edge of the console, his mind racing as he tried to comprehend the humans' tactics. They're using themselves as bait, one of his officers said, incredulous. They have no regard for their own lives. No, Zarnkal growled, his voice low and contemplative. It's not recklessness. It's sacrifice. The humans weren't mindless or suicidal. They were precise, calculating. Every move was designed to create an opening, to turn impossible odds into fleeting opportunities. And somehow they were succeeding. General, another officer interrupted. The reactor core is nearing critical failure. We must evacuate. Not yet, Zarnkal snapped. His eyes remained fixed on the display, watching the humans with a mix of frustration and awe. I want them alive. Dispatch all remaining guards to cut off their escape. Seal the lower decks. The officer hesitated. But General, the ship. I said now? ##### The gauntlet. Jenna's squad burst into another corridor, this one wider and lined with glowing red panels. The ship's automated systems were in full lockdown, bulkhead doors slamming shut behind them as they ran. We're being herded, Daniel said, his voice grim. No kidding, Kira muttered, glancing at her HUD. They're cutting off all exits except the hangar bay, Jenna finished, realization dawning. They want to trap us. Let them try, Alvarez said, a defiant grin on his face. We've come this far. Might as well make it interesting. The hangar bay was massive, a cavernous space filled with alien craft and equipment. Dozens of Thale soldiers waited for them, their weapons trained on the entrance. Overhead, automated turrets swiveled into position, their targeting lasers sweeping the room. All right, Jenna said, her voice calm despite the overwhelming sight. This is it. We hold the line here. Kira, get that door open. Alvarez, Daniels, cover fire on my mark. The squad moved into position, their training kicking in as the Thale forces opened fire. Plasma bolts rained down like a storm, but the humans didn't falter. They ducked, weaved, and returned fire with ruthless efficiency, their smaller frames making them harder targets. Kira worked furiously at the control panel, her fingers a blur as she bypassed the Thale security protocols. Almost there, she shouted over the cacophony of battle. Jenna's rifle clicked empty, and she switched to her sidearm without hesitation. The Thale were closing in, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the humans' position. Hold steady, she yelled, her voice carrying a ferocity that inspired her team to push harder. Finally, with a triumphant beep, the hangar doors began to slide open. Beyond them lay the cold expanse of space, and their only chance of escape. Go? Jenna shouted, motioning for her squad to move. One by one they sprinted toward the opening, ducking and dodging as plasma fire scorched the air around them. Jenna was the last to go, her eyes scanning the battlefield one final time before she turned and ran. Behind her, the Vorgthale groaned, its reactor nearing its catastrophic limit. The ship was dying, and with it, the hope of a Dominion victory. ###### The General's fury. As the hangar bay exploded into chaos, General Zarnkal watched helplessly from the bridge. The humans were escaping, their stolen craft zipping through the debris field as the Vorgthale began to implode. "Prepare my shuttle," Zarnkal growled, his pride wounded but his resolve unbroken. The humans had won this round, but the war was far from over. And as the Vorgthale erupted in a brilliant flash of light, Zarnkal swore one thing. He would not underestimate these creatures again. "They are not prey," he muttered, his claws carving deep grooves into his command chair. "They are predators." The Vorgthale erupted into a fiery explosion behind them, its massive form tearing apart as the destabilized reactor finally gave out. The shockwave rippled through the void, sending debris hurtling in every direction. Jenna Carter gripped the controls of the commandeered Thale shuttle, her hands steady despite the violent turbulence. "Status report," she barked, her eyes locked on the fractured hull of the Thale warship now disintegrating in the distance. "Still in one piece, barely," Alvarez groaned from the co-pilot seat, scanning the chaotic swarm of debris on their radar. "Engines are holding, shields are active. For now. We've got incoming." Kira shouted from the rear, her voice tense. She was strapped into a jump seat, her weapon ready even in the cramped shuttle. "Thale pursuit craft, 6 o'clock?" Jenna's gut tightened. Of course, the Thale wouldn't let them escape so easily. The Dominion had an unshakable reputation to maintain, and letting a handful of human infiltrators slip away after sabotaging their flagship would be an unforgivable stain on their honor. "They're hailing us," Daniels added, his voice grim. He patched the audio through, and the guttural growl of a Thale officer filled the cabin. "Humans," the voice snarled, dripping with contempt. "You think you've won? You are insects, vermin scurrying in the dark. There will be no escape." Jenna smirked, her fingers dancing over the control panel as she pushed the shuttle into a sharp dive. "I don't know, lizard boy. Your flagship says otherwise." The comm channel exploded with enraged snarls before the transmission cut out. Moments later, the pursuing craft opened fire, plasma bolts streaking through the void. ####### The chase. The Thale fighters were sleek and deadly, their triangular frames bristling with weaponry. They moved in perfect formation, their pilots trained to operate as a single deadly unit. Jenna, however, had no intention of playing by their rules. "Hang on," she yelled, jerking the shuttle into a sharp corkscrew maneuver. The small craft groaned under the strain, but the move succeeded in scattering the Thale formation. "Alvarez, fire up the countermeasures." "On it," Alvarez replied, slamming his fist onto a panel. A barrage of chaff and flares erupted from the shuttle's rear, confusing the Thale targeting systems. Two of the pursuing fighters broke off, their sensors overloaded. Jenna seized the opening, weaving through the debris field left by the Vorgthale's destruction. The jagged remains of the warship provided brief moments of cover, but the Thale were relentless. "Shields at 60%. Alvarez reported, his voice strained. "If we take another direct hit, we're done for." "We're not dying out here," Jenna growled. Her mind raced as she scanned the battlefield, looking for an edge. That's when she saw it, a massive chunk of the Vorgthale's hull, spinning slowly in the void. "Kira, Daniels, brace yourselves," she said, a grin tugging at her lips. "What are you planning?" Kira asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and alarm. "Something stupid," Jenna admitted. She angled the shuttle toward the debris, threading it through a narrow gap between two massive plates of twisted metal. The pursuing Thale fighters hesitated, their pilots unsure of whether to follow. "Come on, follow me," Jenna muttered under her breath, coaxing them like prey into a trap. The fighters gave chase, their plasma bolts narrowly missing the shuttle. As they closed in, Jenna suddenly veered upward, pulling the shuttle into a steep climb. The Thale pilots, focused on their target, didn't notice the jagged protrusions of metal directly in their path, until it was too late. Two fighters collided with the debris, their shields flaring briefly before they disintegrated into fiery explosions. "That's two down," Daniels said, letting out a low whistle. "Nice flying, boss." "Don't celebrate yet," Jenna replied. "We've still got 3 on our tail." ###### The General's Gambit. Aboard his personal shuttle, General Zarnkal observed the chase with mounting frustration. The humans were outnumbered, outgunned, and flying a stolen craft they barely understood, yet they continued to defy all logic. Enough of this, he snarled. Bring me their location. His technicians worked quickly, tracing the humans' movements through the debris field. Zarnkal's shuttle, a heavily armored craft bristling with advanced weaponry, surged forward to join the pursuit. General, if we fire on them directly, we risk destroying the shuttle before capturing them, one of his officers cautioned. Then disable their engines, Zarnkal growled. I want them alive. As his ship closed in, Zarnkal felt a flicker of anticipation. These humans intrigued him. They were resourceful, cunning, and above all, fearless. In another life he might have admired them. But now they were a threat that had to be eliminated, or perhaps understood. ###### The desperate gambit. Jenna's shuttle shuddered as another plasma bolt grazed their shields. The Thale fighters were closing in and her options were running out. We can't keep this up, Alvarez shouted. They're pinning us down? I know, Jenna replied, her mind racing. But we're not out of tricks yet. Her eyes locked onto a massive asteroid drifting in the distance. It was pockmarked with craters, its surface jagged and uneven, the perfect place to lose their pursuers. Alvarez plot a course to that asteroid. Kira, get ready to deploy the last of the countermeasures. Daniels, keep those fighters off our backs. The team sprang into action, their movements instinctive despite the chaos. Jenna pushed the shuttle to its limits, the engines screaming in protest as they surged toward the asteroid. Behind them, the Thale fighters followed, their plasma cannons firing relentlessly. The shuttle's shields flickered and failed, leaving them vulnerable. Now Kira, Jenna shouted. Kira activated the countermeasures, releasing a cloud of reflective particles into the void. The Thale targeting system struggled to lock onto the shuttle, giving Jenna just enough time to dive into the asteroid's shadow. The shuttle skimmed the asteroid's surface, its hull rattling with every near miss. Jenna navigated through the jagged terrain, using the asteroid's craters and ridges as cover. The Thale fighters hesitated, their pilots struggling to follow the shuttle's erratic movements. One fighter clipped a ridge, spiraling out of control before crashing into the asteroid's surface. Only two left, Jenna muttered, her focus unwavering. But before she could celebrate, a new blip appeared on the radar, a massive Thale ship closing in fast. Jenna's heart sank as she realized who it was. General Zarnkal, Alvarez said, his voice low. The Thale commander's ship loomed over them, its weapons charging. Jenna tightened her grip on the controls, determination hardening her features. All right, she said, her voice calm despite the odds. Let's see how far we can push them. The hunt was far from over, and the humans weren't done fighting yet. The asteroid's shadow enveloped the stolen shuttle as Jenna Carter made a series of sharp, evasive maneuvers. The Thale fighters prowled just behind, their plasma cannons firing in coordinated bursts. Ahead of her, General Zarnkal's massive craft loomed like a predator closing in for the kill. Inside the shuttle, the tension was suffocating. Sparks flew from overloaded panels, and the constant blaring of alarms underscored their dire situation. Shields are gone, Alvarez reported grimly, his voice barely cutting through the cacophony. Engines running at 40%. If we don't do something now, they'll tear us apart. Jenna's jaw tightened. Every instinct told her to keep running, but the truth was undeniable. There was nowhere left to go. No escape, Daniels muttered, his hands clenched around his rifle. They've got us boxed in. Jenna didn't respond. Her mind was racing, scanning their surroundings for any opportunity. Any chance. That's when she noticed the asteroid itself, a massive, unstable rock riddled with metallic veins glowing faintly from internal heat. Kira, she barked, scan the asteroid. Is that what I think it is? Kira quickly pulled up a readout from the shuttle's sensors. Her eyes widened. It's full of volatile minerals, nickel-iron, thorium deposits. If we hit it hard enough, the whole thing could blow. Alvarez's head whipped around. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? Jenna grinned grimly. We're not getting out of this alive unless we change the game. #######. Preparing for impact. The plan was insane, but insanity had always been humanity's greatest strength. Jenna laid it out quickly, her voice calm and decisive. Kira, reconfigure the shuttle's remaining power to amplify a pulse through the mining lasers we picked up on Thale Prime. Alvarez, I need you to rig the remaining explosives to detonate at a distance. You want to blow up an asteroid? Daniels asked, disbelief etched across his face. I want to blow up an asteroid while we're still on it, Jenna replied. If we time it right, the explosion will take out their fighters and cripple Zarnkal's ship. The shockwave will launch us clear. Or tear us apart, Daniels muttered. We're already dead if we don't try, Kira shot back, her hands flying over the controls. Let's do this. Alvarez worked furiously, rigging the explosives to sync with the shuttle's systems. Sweat dripped from his brow, but his hands didn't falter. Charges set, he finally said. This is going to be one hell of a fireworks show. ###### The General's triumph. From the bridge of his ship, General Zarnkal watched the humans' shuttle weave through the asteroid's ridges. His ship's weapons were locked on, and his remaining fighters circled the asteroid, hemming the humans in. They've run out of moves, he said, his voice cold and triumphant. Finish them. The weapons officer nodded, and the ship's massive plasma cannon began charging. Zarnkal leaned forward, his claws gripping the edge of the console. This was it. The humans' defiance would end here. But as he watched, the shuttle stopped moving. Instead of fleeing, it hovered above the asteroid's surface, its rear facing him like a cornered animal daring its predator to strike. What are they doing? One of his officers asked, confusion evident in their tone. Desperation, Zarnkal sneered. Prepare to fire. #######. The chain reaction. Inside the shuttle, Jenna's hands hovered over the control panel, her fingers poised over the detonation trigger. Alvarez, Kira, how much time do we have once this thing blows? 10 seconds if we're lucky, Alvarez replied. Maybe less. Good enough, Jenna said. She hit the comms. Everyone strap in and hold on to something. Daniels, get ready on weapons. We'll need cover fire the moment we eject. Daniels nodded, his rifle ready as he took position at the shuttle's side port. Here we go, Jenna muttered, taking a deep breath. For Earth. She hit the trigger. The explosives planted on the asteroid ignited with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave rippling through space. The asteroid itself shuddered violently, its internal heat combining with the volatile minerals to create a catastrophic chain reaction. The explosion was blinding. A massive fireball engulfed the asteroid, sending chunks of molten rock flying in every direction. The shockwave tore through the pursuing fighters, obliterating them instantly. Even Zarnkal's heavily armored ship wasn't spared. The blast slammed into it with the force of a tidal wave, ripping through its shields and disabling its engines. Inside the shuttle, Jenna fought to keep control as the shockwave launched them into the void. The craft rattled and groaned, alarms screaming as debris pelted the hull. Engines are fried, Alvarez yelled. We're drifting. Better drifting than dead, Kira shot back. ######. The Predator humbled. On his crippled ship, General Zarnkal staggered to his feet, his pride as shattered as his vessel. Smoke filled the bridge and the few surviving officers scrambled to contain the damage. He stared at the display, where the human shuttle was now little more than a distant blip, vanishing into the darkness of space. They had escaped. Against all odds they had escaped. They're remarkable, Zarnkal muttered, his voice low and tinged with reluctant admiration. General? One of his officers asked hesitantly. Zarnkal straightened, his expression hardening. Send word to the Dominion. This isn't over. These humans, they're more dangerous than we ever imagined. We underestimated them once. We will not do so again. ######. A flicker of hope. The shuttle drifted in the silence of space, its engines cold and its power reserves dwindling. Inside, Jenna's team sat in tense silence, their breaths shallow as they waited for any sign of rescue, or doom. Do you think they'll come after us? Daniels asked, breaking the quiet. They'll try, Jenna replied, her gaze distant as she stared out the viewport. But we made them bleed today. They won't forget that. And Earth? Kira asked softly. Jenna turned to face her team, a small, weary smile tugging at her lips. Earth knows we're still fighting. That's enough for now. As the stars stretched endlessly before them, the faint signal of an approaching human vessel crackled through the comms. Relief washed over the team as Jenna leaned back in her seat, allowing herself a rare moment of rest. They had survived. They had done the impossible. And as long as they drew breath, humanity's fight was far from over.